All right. You are here in Shadow. You thought this was the real world, and then someone came and knocked on your door talking about past lives or some nonsense like that, and yanked you into the actuality, this multidimensional, magical array of worlds, of which our world is just is it false, or is it the past, or is it something else? We're not quite sure. But Invisible Sun is a game about this actuality. It's a game about this realm of magic. And one of the things that gets people a little bit hung up is just how do you even get started with something like this? So Tyler and I are going to go dive down that rabbit hole, and Tyler is going to be my willing or unwilling test subject in this matter.
It's true enough.
Now, Tyler, you're pretty experienced with making characters for Dungeons and Dragons.
Altogether too much so.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where there's just so many backup characters, I will never play them all.
What tends to be the thing that gets you coming up with a character idea?
In coming up with a character for D&D, there are three basic aspects to a character. There is the class, there is the race, or species, if you will, and there's the background. You can start from any one of those. Sometimes it's you want to play this species, this race. And you go, okay, how do I see myself wanting to play a member of this race? There are more stereotypical roles, there are the more deviant roles, and then there are the I just can't see it roles, as it were. You could take a class and say, I really want to play this class. What sort of person do I want to play this class? And then you flesh out the person from the perspective of the class. Or you start with a background and a history, and you go, okay, so what sort of history do I like the most? And given this history, where could I see that leading into as a class? Like what sort of pathways can I take from this starting point to get to any of the particular class? But in that third case, it's like, this is the character I want to play. And it's knowing the personality, it's knowing the history, and the class simply becomes a mechanical, almost side note to the nature of the character themselves. But there's also the fact that you could do things randomly. Sometimes I've literally just written down lists of races I liked, classes I liked, and backgrounds I liked, and rolled randomly to see what came out. Yeah. And then tried to take the things that came out and justify a connection between them in a way that seems both plausible and fun.
And we'll go somewhere down that line probably next week or the week after when we get into like NPC creation.
Sure enough.
Invisible Sun. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say as well that the reason I can do this though with D&D is I'm familiar enough with D&D and the three branches of character creation and the subsections of that I've got so much background detail memorized. There's so much stuff that I don't even have to think about anymore because I just know it. Whereas Invisible Sun, I don't even know what the base categories of making a character look like. So although I might be able to take the same logic into such a character creation, that doesn't mean that I know what I'm getting into.
So I'd say that actually the more challenging part is that the logic breaks down too. So whereas D&D is largely coming out of a particular type of fantasy tropes, Invisible Sun is really looking at weird fiction, surrealism, bits of sci-fi fantasy, but horror, other things, the uncanny, and to the extent that sorry, your typing is really loud.
Sorry, I'll stop.
Or maybe just mute if you're gonna.
That's fair. My bad.
In between, that's okay. But with Invisible Sun, it's bringing to bear all these very, very different literary and artistic influences, and so you can go in and you can say, well, I know how elves work. I've read fantasy fiction. These are the tropes. I can play against type because I know what type is. That's not necessarily the case with this world. And More so, it's because the way the game is structured is designed to be very deeply collaborative with both the GM, but also the other players. So one of the things that happens with character creation is that you cannot actually fully create your character alone. You're going to have to bring your partial character to the session 0, where the other players will finish it for you. Another part where the basic framing breaks down is in Dungeons and Dragons and others. You often have people who are out journeying. They're going out places, they're adventurers, they're the ones that don't fit in. In Invisible Sun, you are coming home. It may not be a home that you remember, but you're coming home. Your house is actually a key part of character generation, and it integrates you into the environment. And one of the things that helps with the surrealism and helps with the weirdness is by giving you this social framing, this household, these other things. It helps give you a bit of a semblance of something to hold on to while the rest of the world goes weird and topsy-turvy. So that said, though, it is coming from the pedigree of Dungeons and Dragons, and so they do have all the categories that Tyler's talking about, just different types of categories.
All right.
So to give a little bit of a teaser first, I'm going to share my screen here. So I have here the key, and I guess the first thing I'll come over. The first thing that I'll say is you need to decide, if you're the player, you need to talk to your GM. If you're the GM, you need to decide how much information you're going to give your players, because Invisible Sun is also very much a game about secrets, and it really rewards selective presentation of information. And so when I started playing with my group, I only gave my players the key, which is one of the 4 books that comes in the black cube.
All right.
I then gave them access to the way after our first session.
Okay.
And I have given them parts of other books as needed. There's a whole ton of spell cards. I did not give them access to the cards in general. What happened is once they had come up with their character idea, I then gave them a small pool of cards, maybe 8 to 10, to choose the spells or the ephemera objects and the incantations that would be theirs. So this very much rewards curation. And I know other GMs who specifically are not reading certain things until they hit a beat where they're willing to open that part of the box. But for players in particular, the information can be overwhelming because there's so much of it, and it's so new, and there's so little that has precedent in their minds that they can just be like, oh, this is like that thing that I know.
So little familiarity.
Exactly. So with that said, the most basic thing that you're going to do, and this is coming over from the Cypher system that Invisible Sun is kind of a variant of, is you're going to create your character sentence.
Okay.
And honestly, like for what you're bringing to the GM, this is 90% of it. If you can come up with this character sentence, you will have most of the things that you need.
Okay.
So you talked about race and class and background in Dungeons and Dragons. The equivalents here are foundation, heart, order, and forte.
All right.
So do you know what any of those are yet? Just let me put that out there first.
Straight up, no.
So a couple of these involve a little bit of world building. So in Invisible Sun, there are a number of different suns that all have different flavors of magic, more or less. And you also have a number of different types of creatures, one of whom is Vizsla. And Vizsla are basically like humans or humanoids. They are magic users. They have special magic guilds called orders. And there are 4 of them that are published in the book. I know of some others that may be unofficial or secret, but the 4 are the Order of Weavers, the Vancian Order, the Order Goetica,
Mm-hmm.
and the Order of Makers.
All right.
There are also
Maker, Goetica, Vancium.
there are also apostates who are not a member of an order.
Right.
So at the most basic level, you're going to choose one of those orders. So this is the section in the key. That's the symbol for the Vances. That's the Vance that comes with the game. They have some sample character sheets. There's the Maker symbol.
Mm-hmm.
There's their sample Maker, the red shaper. Have some really evocative pictures here. There's the Weaver symbol.
Mm-hmm.
And their Weaver. And then the Goetic symbol. There's their Goetic here. And finally, apostates. Say what?
I said, yep, surrealist.
And they come with, so the actual physical game itself comes with these amazing character sheets, these character tomes that are super distinct for each type. So this is the Goetics. This is the Makers.
Mm-hmm. Much more organized.
This is the Weavers.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
The apostates.
Okay.
Doesn't have any labels or anything.
No.
And then the Vance. So if you were working with a physical game, you could be filling in the stuff here. Since we've had to move everything digitally, and I find it just more helpful for my organization, I've moved all my players' character sheets into a shared Notion. So I'm using Notion.so here. And this is actually one of my characters from a game that has since ended. But this is my character sentence. My name is Aaron. I'm a connected gallant of the Order of the Vance who brandishes battle magic. So here we have the name, the foundation, the heart, the order, and then the forte. So we're going to walk through those one at a time. So first of all, the orders, this is a fairly simple set of choices. So you're basically choosing between those 5 things. They all have very different mechanics. And this gets into a little bit. So there's some GM coaching here that's really worthwhile. Weavers basically are going to improvise spells as they play. Mm-hmm. So you're going to give them aggregates, which are basically like these little strains of magic, and they're thematic. So it might be like an aggregate of freedom and an aggregate of wind. And then they can take any 2 parts of that. They have like absences and
presences.
That's what I wanted to say, but it's not that. But basically, as long as you don't include an absence, you can make a spell on the fly mid-game. That spell didn't exist before. You just make it and you can cast it. Okay. It's a really awesome order. It definitely requires a lot of creativity, and it's a bit of a heavier lift for the player. If you have somebody who really wants to color within the lines, Weavers are not the order for them.
No, the Weavers are the people who make the borders. They're not the people coloring in the borders. They're making their own borders that other people can then color in later.
Exactly.
And they're making them all sorts of weird shapes.
The Makers and Goetics are interesting in that, like, so much of this game is built around things happening, preparations, and things happening off to the side. It's a much slower paced game, or it can be. There's an expectation that days or weeks or even months might pass between sessions, that when you go to learn a spell, it might take a week or 2 to learn the new spell that you just found. And so similarly, the Maker is effectively making those cool magical items that you find in a game like Dungeons and Dragons. They can make those things. And there's a whole structure for how they make them and how long they last and what they can do with it. So the Maker is someone who's going to, in a less improvisational on the moment thing, they're going to be inventing new forms of magic. And they're going to be, turning those into objects, and they're going to be able to bring those objects around. They're going to be able to give them to other people or sell them.
Mm-hmm.
The Goetics are similar in that most of their work is not going to be happening in the heat of the moment, but they are summoners, and they're going to be summoning angels and demons and all kinds of weird and wild creatures. Mm-hmm. And again, it's going to be based off of, whose names they can find, whose pacts they can learn. And that's something where they can collaborate very heavily with the GM to come up with some of these ideas as well. But a lot of that action, and at least initially, isn't going to generally happen just spur of the moment. There's going to be some preparation required, but having prepared, they'll be able to do some really fascinating things with that. The advances and the apostates are really the most, in the middle and flexible. The advances are spellcasters, and their special ability is that they have a physical grid that represents their mind, and there's different sized Vancian spell cards, and you can basically keep those cards and cast them for free. So you can take any number of those spell cards and arrange them in your mind in any way that fits. Mm-hmm. As long as you can fit them all in your mind, you can cast them for free if you have them prepared, and then you only pay the sorcery cost for them if you decide to keep them in your mind, basically. And they also are the most institutionally robust. So if you have a Vance, they're going to have journeymen who are under them that they can, go send to have them do tasks. They have a phenomenal library and university that they can leverage, and that they should absolutely be leveraging that stuff as a player. Mm-hmm. Their goal and dream is to come up with their own highly personalized named spell, and pretty much all of the Vancian spells are named after the Vances who created those things, and they get passed down. The apostates don't have any special track for abilities or anything like that. They just have a whole grab bag of things that as they progress, they can choose a different thing from the grab bag. It's going to be a lot more, they have a faster, they're more useful earlier on, but they level out quicker from a experience progression perspective. So hopefully that overview makes sense and gives you some idea as to what you might be attracted to.
It does. Matter of fact, I made my decision some time ago.
Okay, well, go for it. What are we doing?
Weaver.
Weaver.
And
why is that?
Well, partly because I'm very fond of the idea of being able to take discrepant things and go, okay, I'm going to take it in this way and this, and I'm going to tweak this in this way and put them together, and they're going to become this. I like that a lot. For me, it has, at least partially, some reason rooted in my own, honestly, my songwriting, where I'm constantly trying to find the right words to fit here, there, and the other place in order to put them together to evoke the correct nuance of meaning that I want a line to give.
Okay.
Also, I have a tendency to, it seems, enjoy the sound of things that end up being structurally difficult. It's not because they're structurally difficult that I enjoy them, but the ones that I like the sound of the most end up simply being the most structurally difficult. For instance, the first D&D character I ever made was a wizard. The fact of the matter is, having a first ever D&D character be a wizard is a lot of bookkeeping and keeping stuff sorted. You got to have a lot of things kept under control on your own end if you're not going to be a burden on the rest of the table.
And that's I think part of the challenge is effectively these are all wizards.
Yes, but not exactly.
Yeah,
because
not quite in the same respect.
You've got a summoner. Okay, so you're working with summoning entities. That's got one niche of creativity to it. On another, you've got the Vancian stuff. Well, the creative fashion is, well, how can you do the jigsaw puzzle all the time, it seems, and keep that working for you? The makers, it's more about the construction of things. Even if we're not talking about a physical construction necessarily, you're still talking about the construction of things. That one doesn't sing to me so much, if I can put it that way. Making of physical or more tangible things honestly has a lot less appeal to me than the idea of the on-the-fly making of a more ethereal or insubstantive thing made manifest. And that speaks to the musician in me.
Well, I have to say, like, having been on the receiving end as a GM of a Weaver player, she has pulled out some amazing rabbits from some amazing hats where, you know, you create a situation and there's one moment where I thought they were all like, I thought for sure that they were going to be caught in a place where they really should not have been. And she ended up coming up with a spell called We Were Never Here and got the entire party out of the room safely. And another time allowed people to speak to an inanimate object and we had a 20-minute conversation that I did not have planned because she came up with that spell and succeeded marvelously. And you go, okay, yes. I guess we're doing that.
Yes. And that's an instance of the DM needing, or GM as it were, needing to have a great deal of capacity to fly by the seat of their pants, because you can't prepare for this.
No. If you have a Weaver, you will be caught out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So looking at the Weaver section here, you're always going to start at first degree. First degree isn't the bottom. There's like journeyman and there's lower levels below this. First degree is basically like you're taking this seriously. Think of it as like you've earned your bachelor's. Okay, there's lots of people who don't earn their bachelor's, and that's totally okay.
Yeah.
You've effectively earned your bachelor's, and there's some higher ranks above that. And again, there's also no expectation of going up the ranks.
But if I could put it this way, you've made it to your first official level of accomplishment.
Yeah. This is the first level where you're starting to have a say in the institution.
Okay.
Yeah. So with that said, there's a number of things that kind of come in here. And what I tend to do when I'm putting this stuff together is I'll fill in the things that I can fill in. I'll kind of raise question marks for things that I want to come back to or I just don't know. So for example, here, ephemera use, we can safely possess 3 ephemera at any given time. I'm just going to plug that ephemera limit in here, and we'll come back to what the hell that is later.
Sure.
Special skill. We have 1 level of skill with anything having to do with understanding, quantifying, or identifying magic that lies outside of codified magical practices like spells, rituals, invocations, and the like. So I'm just going to put under skills, what do we want to call this? Like fringe magic or something like that?
Sure.
Or, yeah, we'll just call it that for the moment.
All right.
Level 1. With that, threads we will come back to. So we need to do ephemera. We need to talk threads. But that's the, and you'll see here that it's in yellow. This is going to reference the way. So the way the book is organized is if there's something that's being referenced in one book that's defined in another, it gives you exactly what the concept is, the page number in the book to find it in.
Nice. That's a really well-indexed system.
This stuff is well indexed. Some of the other things don't always necessarily work out, but this stuff works out really well. And then the other part that's super essential when they start playing, this isn't really essential at all for character generation, but there's a spell effects by level table, because when they start actually playing, they're going to be saying, I'm going to make a level 3 spell, and they need to make a spell that falls roughly within the appropriate power level. So having a nice table of like, here's some reference effects, and they can figure out, well, this is closest to these things. So it would be about a level 2.
Okay.
And then at first degree, we have access to 2 aggregates and can weave them. So we get 2 aggregates. The way, page 64. We will come back to that. Then if we go just quickly to the next page. Nope, that's it for the first degree. So we have our order figured. We're doing things a little bit. The chapters don't quite line up with the sentence, and there's reasons for that, largely because logically knowing your order is going to help define some of these other things. And that's also why we're going to go to heart next.
All right.
So heart is, think of it almost like they have the simple description here. There's only 4 of them to choose from. And think of them as like your baseline personality types, like back in the day when they had like phlegmatic and
sanguine.
Exactly. So here you have gallant, stoic, ardent, and empath, and they pretty much mean what they sound like. So gallant, nimble in thought and deed, quick thinking. Empath is you touch and are touched by the emotions and thoughts around you, blah, blah, blah. The short thing with this is this defines your core stats, but it also defines your associated card family, and there's an associated animal and object. This matters for the Soothe deck because all the Soothe cards, the Soothe deck is basically a tarot deck that's used during play, and it changes the magical currents that are active at a given time and place. So what's great about this is, it's basically where you have these passive modifiers. So you might have a really cool spell, but it's a blue spell, and right now blue is -1 because of the current Soothe card. Mm-hmm. Or if that card matches your heart, it might be a -2 for you. So there's things like that come into play during the game, and that's also where this comes into effect.
Okay.
So here we have just these 2 pages. So gallant, stoic, empath, and ardent. I could talk about these more, but do you have a general sense where you would tilt on that?
Not yet, because I can't actually read it. The text on the screen, as I am currently seeing it, is a little unclear. That's a bit better.
All right, I'll take it one at a time here. So here's empath. Mm-hmm. Go ahead and read whatever parts you're focusing on aloud.
We're talking about someone who thrives primarily on emotions based on both themselves and others and the interaction between the two, as well as being able to play off emotional interaction between other people. Now, if I were to play something like this, I would be playing, honestly, kind of outside my base personality, because although I can do it, it's not necessarily intuitive. What I know is based on a lot of prior history of trial and error and building up a framework of this is how you interact with this stuff. This is how to translate what I'm seeing into something that makes sense to me. Mm-hmm. So to do this would not reflect me. It might prove rather difficult to be something like this as a first go around. I feel like trying to make this sort of character difference from yourself it's honestly a mark of a more experienced role player.
Yeah.
To be able to say, this person who is very unlike me is someone who I will now enter into and play truly.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, so here's Ardent.
Mm-hmm.
This one's much more in line with your default.
It may be. I mean, I can certainly say that I'm someone who is often quite willing to get impressed by the moment and desire to act.
Mm-hmm.
And then stoic. What was that one? Right. This is the logical person. This is the first step, you think.
Yeah.
All right. Makes sense. And then the gallant. This is the most unlike me out of the 4. Straight up the most unlike me. And it's funny because after all I said about the empath, I look at the 4 of them as they currently stand. And I go, I don't know. It kind of looks like maybe the empath.
Do you want to do it?
Yeah.
All right. Do you want to actually use empath or waveheart, or you could say some of these other things for your sentence?
Right.
If you don't feel like empath has quite the right ring to it.
Well, let's have the options of compassionate or perceptive at this point, and I'll decide exactly later.
Okay. You're compassionate
Slash
/ perceptive. All right.
And I'll figure out which one of those best applies later.
So then this gets into our stat pools. So your stat pools, if we go back to our character sheet things here, the player's envelope, all the players would also have a grimoire normally, and you'd have a pool sheet. You'll see here you have these certs or curts. I don't know how Latin we're going with this. I'll call them certs and qualia. Basically, you have these 2 general categories and then 4 pools in each. It's a slightly weird system that I have not played Cypher. My understanding is that this borrows from Cypher, and the whole certs versus qualia thing feels a little confusing to me because after character generation, you almost never use those 2 terms directly. But generally speaking, these are all going to be body versus mind, or mind and magic, right? So with certs, then you have 8 that you can divide amongst these 4 pools however you wish. And this is basically your core stats.
All right.
So how would you like to divide those? These are the 4: accuracy, movement, physicality, and perception. We'll be able to put some more in here. So we're not done with them, but we're just starting.
From here, there are 8. So let's say from here, I'm going to put 3 into perception.
Okay.
3 into movement, 1 into accuracy, and 1 into physicality.
Okay. And there's a section in the key that kind of talks through like how you would use some of these things. So for example, instead of rolling to hit, like if you're trying to hit something, you can spend accuracy to better hit it. If you're trying to move somewhere, movement. Physicality can also help you like withstand damage, perceptions about seeing and perceiving things around you, etc. Qualia is even weirder. So intellect is you're trying to think through something logically, you're trying to remember something, you're trying to understand a book that you're reading. Interaction is going to be with people or sometimes not with people, but sorcery and sortilege are 2 particular ones. Sorcery is what you're going to spend to do magical things or cast spells. You almost never want a low sorcery. If you are going to go low in sorcery, that will be a particular role-playing challenge that I have had one player do semi-successfully, but not for the faint of heart. So I would not have like a 2.
No, I was thinking not less than 3.
And then sortilege is unique in that when you spend something from your sortilege pool, it gives you an extra dice, a magical dice to use in whatever test you're doing. So you could apply a sortilege to a perception test, for example. It just gives you an extra dice.
Well, I'm honestly looking at this and going, I kind of want to do 4 sorcery, 3 intellect, 2 sortilege, and 0 interaction.
We will start there.
No, that's 4, 3, 2. There you go.
So then you'll see that you have 6 points to divide as you wish.
6 additional?
6 additional points.
Okay. And so now it's dividing those up among these 8 categories in addition.
Correct.
All right. Well, if I was to add more into here, I would want to add, let's put one of the 6 into interaction.
Okay.
1 into physicality. 2 into perception. 1 more into sorcery. And 1 more into accuracy.
All right. And then you'll see here, you can choose 2 skills from this list.
All right.
You would gain 1 level in each of those skills.
Let's do 1 level in resist. And 1 level in seeing through deception.
All right. And the way skills work is skills can be basically anything. They are going to make your they're going to improve your venture on a test. So the way that all of the skill test things work is that there is some challenge number that you're trying to hit. And then you're trying to muster up all your skills and other things that would give you a base number, and then you're rolling a D10 and adding whatever you roll to that base number to try to meet or exceed the challenge that was set. So each level in something is going to reduce how hard the challenge is. It's going to reduce that number.
All right.
And your card family is visions, and I usually put that right under the pronouns here. As an easy reminder, it'll come up a lot.
Okay. So
we now have 2 out of our 4.
Mm-hmm.
Not counting the name.
I've already got the name.
Okay, well, we'll come up to that.
Sorry, for me, names are just easy.
Fair enough. So Forte is the next one. Forte is going to be the much more, so orders are very general. There's only the 4 main ones, but they offer a very structured level of advancement between going from 1st degree to 2nd degree to 3rd degree and onward. Mm-hmm. There's a parallel track, which is Forte. And Forte is going to be a very specific magical set of abilities that is distinctive to you. And so are you able to see?
I can see most of this list right down to Writhes and Squirms.
That's the last one on here.
Okay.
Now, there are more Fortes in some of the other books. We'll just stick to this list for the purposes of this.
All right. Now, there is a whole lot of cryptic terminology here for somebody who has no idea what they're looking at. So
this is one where I would say, unless there's a very specific reason what to do otherwise, just go with what sounds cool. So pick some of these things that seem cool, and we'll dive into them a little bit and talk through them.
What is Breathes Runes?
Breathes Runes. The magic inherent within me manifests in every exhalation. Shapes, letters, and words can be seen as misty remnants of my breath that hover in the air before they fade. With a little concentration, I can make these runes appear in any language in which I can read and write. They remain for a few moments before dissipating. However, with great concentration and a bit of sorcery, I can control these breath runes, and use them to my advantage to store specific magical effects. I can typically have only 1 breath rune at a time hovering by me. In any event, breath runes always fade if I sleep or lose consciousness. I can easily dispel a rune I've breathed at any time. So, and they go into a little bit as to maybe how you got the ability, what this means for you in terms of how you look, what this means in terms of like what you are trying to accomplish. Paths to joy and despair. So the units of advancement in this system are acumen and crux. And crux is formed by a joy and a despair, which are actually tokens that the GM will give you for different things. So knowing which kinds of things, if you breathe runes, then you know that I will get joy if I use the power of my runes to help complete my character arc's climax. Whereas, if I literally choke on a rune, I will get despair from that. So that's actually giving you cues as to these are the things in the game that will get me those units of experience.
Right.
And then finally, you have Forte abilities. And you're going to start with the first one. In this case, there's a couple with which to choose from. And then select more based on your path. So let's look at your path here. There we go. So in this case, you actually have 2 different starting points that you can choose. So you could choose Protective Rune or Assisting Rune, but then what would happen is as you gain Crux, you can spend it to either take the other branch as well, or advance along the branch that you're going, and then so on and so forth. So you have to follow a line that you can traverse.
Yeah. Makes sense. And it does mean that if you follow along one path, you must necessarily leave some potential final choices behind. So there's a process of elimination here as well, going, okay, if I decide to go this way, that means I'm making it harder for me to do anything related to the other direction.
Harder, but not impossible. Yeah. So once you start looking at something that seems interesting to you, then you start looking at the abilities and go, okay, what would these be like to play? So for instance, we have these two and saying, pick one of these paths. Protective Rune is a level 1 invisible effect. I breathe a rune that hovers near my head. When I am next attacked, the rune grants me +1 to my defenses and then fades away.
Mm-hmm.
And the assisting rune gives you +1 to whatever your action is. You name the action, gives you a +1. That's nice and simple.
Mm-hmm.
Then we get a little further. We have the transfer rune, where you can take a breath rune that's hovered near you and give it to somebody else.
That's nice. That's really nice.
Enhancing rune will give you a +1 die to the action that you name. Multiple runes gives you up to 3 at a time. A spell rune lets you breathe a rune that stores a spell up to level 4 that you can then cast triggered in a way that you desire when the rune is touched. Greater Protection Rune is an improved version of that. Greater Spell Rune, and then a Summoning Rune that turns into a level 6 demon, angel, or spirit. So that is the pathways of that forte.
I can safely say, to me, that looks bloody fantastic.
Let's look at one other briefly, just for comparison purposes, but
sure.
Let's plan on, this will be the one to beat.
How about Inhales the Ether?
Inhales the ether. You and I do not breathe the same air, even as we stand shoulder to shoulder. We could not be more different. You can never understand me. Living creatures breathe air. Ghosts breathe aether. Normally, a living creature is utterly unaware of the aether. It's entirely outside of their capability to experience. Aether breathers are different. This substance permeates the actuality, and it's what sustains the dead, allowing them to travel from wherever they died to the pale, and sometimes back again. So same general idea with this. Mm-hmm. You would start with aether breath. I don't need air to live. Aether is everywhere, even in the water or solid rock. So that's just a basic
straight up. That's how it starts.
Yep. Then you can start to breathe it in and expel it as a kind of ectoplasm. You can see the dead and ghosts. Mm-hmm. Then you can start moving through it in any direction not blocked by a solid object. You can shape it so that ghosts and other spirits cannot come close to you. Mm-hmm. You can use it to speak to the dead. You can use it to take the form of a spirit and pass through solid matter,
which is an enhancement on the previous abilities.
Mm-hmm. You can then tap into the aether and make an attack against a spirit or against a material target with spiritual energy. And then finally, if you die, you immediately become a ghost, already accustomed to the aether, with full awareness and control the round following my death. You can partially or fully manifest without needing to make a roll. As Tyler knows, with my existing game, I have a player who's become a ghost, and for the last 2.5 sessions has been finding ways of working with it. Death is not necessarily the end.
No, it is not.
But I'm guessing you still want to go with Breathe Runes?
Honestly, having looked at this one, it's actually really, really close. And at this point, it's kind of a toss-up now because they're both fantastic.
Well, and they give you a sense of what kind of world is it in which these are just things that some people can do.
Yeah, it really does.
All right. I'm going to take a a brief break and just step away here because I need to get some more water or I will be coughing. So I will share this. I will be right back. All right. Who breathes runes?
Or not. Can I go back to breathe runes for just a second? Let me look at that again.
Sure.
Thanks.
What part would you like to see?
Oh, just a quick once-over of the whole thing. I can read relatively quickly. So if I were to looking at this from my head, to me, this is a great deal along the lines of, do I care more about language or do I care more about movement, if I could put it that way? The two avenues that I would be looking at from character creation perspective to figure out, well, what sort of direction do I wish this to work in? And so...
and I think one of the important things that people maybe, because as cool as these fortes are, they're also fairly restrictive. Like they're very focused.
Yes.
And so there's a feeling of, well, am I trapped doing this thing all the time? And the answer is no. There are spells, there are secrets, there's ephemera, there's incantations, there's lots of other things that you can do to kind of round out what you're able to do. Mm-hmm. This is going to be the tent pole abilities.
Yes. And if I think about the fact that I'm a weaver as well, I think it is not an unreasonable aspect that what I am weaving should be, to some degree, connected with how I think about with how this works. So the use of language in weaving disparate things together to form what I want, or using, as it were, ether, or the concept of ether as a basis for weaving these things together to form what I would look for. And each one of them could easily be done. I think that, I don't know, man, I'm second guessing myself. This is one of those instances where I might almost have to have you make a decision for me. And as I say that, I'm going, I kind of want who inhales the ether. Because the thing, if I choose breathes runes, I'm going to be disappointed. If I choose inhales the ether, I'll be like, yeah, I like the other one, but I'm not going to be dissatisfied with this one. So let's go with inhales the ether.
I'll make a note to plug in the appropriate forte ability once we've chosen one.
Yeah, fair enough.
But this also, the forte's background and appearance also gives you some really good cues of like, what could I look like? Where could I be from? It gives you suggestions on character arcs that we will come back to. So there's a lot of seeds. Like once you've defined your order, once you've defined your forte, once you've defined your foundation, you already have a lot of the working pieces of like, who is this person? Where are they coming from? What's their deal?
Yeah.
And then you can, break with that. We're going to skip soul for the moment.
Sure.
And go to foundation. Foundation's a little bit different. They have 8 foundations. It's an adjective. And basically they're going to define what kind of house you have, what kind of income you have, your hidden knowledge, your initial savings, connections that you have with other groups, and then it'll help give you hints again towards like your character arcs. So the 8 to choose from are established, itinerant, connected, aromatic, mendicant, iconoclastic, stalwart, and bizarre. And that gives you a pretty good sense of who these folks are, what these foundations are. Do any of those immediately stand out to you that you want to explore?
Iconoclastic and bizarre.
Okay, so with iconoclastic, you work against or seek to bring down one or more significant organizations.
Right.
Your income is 50 crystal orbs, so every week, that's how much income you get. There's a whole chapter later in the key about how money and economics works in the game. Initial savings is 100 crystal orbs, so that's basically like you can buy whatever you want as like, I already have this when the game starts. Hidden knowledge was the 9th stat that we didn't do anything with before. So if you choose that, your hidden knowledge will be set to 12. Hidden knowledge is basically a special pool that you can use on any kind of test, but it doesn't replenish. Like the only way it replenishes is by the GM giving you a point of hidden knowledge in game.
Right. Okay, so it's one of those ones where it's rather like inspiration as a D&D mechanic. You can use it, or you have it, but once you use it, you have no guarantee of getting it back.
Yeah. Your house can be small, average, hidden, or unique. The house level is 3. That becomes relevant because there are secrets for your houses. There's things that you can get for your houses. Some of those are dependent on your house size and qualities and level.
Right. Okay.
And then here, your connections, depending on what you do for your house, you'll get different levels of connection. So for example, you can get a small house and 2 levels of connection, or a unique house and 0. So there's a little bit of a push-pull there. Connections are basically going to be point levels of how much influence do I have in a given organization? How much knowledge do I have of a given organization? It's going to lower the challenge of any tests involving that organization for you. And then here they give you some examples of, okay, maybe you're trying to overthrow the Church of Midnight, the Court of Noose, the Deathless Triumvirate, and they give examples. The Path is the 3rd of the 4 books that come in the Black Cube, and it's all about setting description, all of the different places that you can go, the people that you can meet, things like that. It's very helpful. I fed it out in trickles to my players, but that's something that you could toss to people to get, if someone wants to read a bunch about the setting, that's the book to give them to dive into this. Okay. And here, if you're trying to specifically target a group, if you're not going to give them the book as the GM, having your player who says, I want to be an iconoclast, what are some groups you could give them, 6 or 8 to kind of chew over and see which works.
All right. Then what about the bizarre?
I'm sorry. Yeah. So bizarre, you have a reputation for being strange and having a very strange house. At least that's what people say. So you have no connections. It's a prominent or unique level 4 house, and you get a special augment for it. So basically, you get most other people don't have the ability to add any augments. The very next section you can see is about augments. Things like secret rooms and other fun things, magical things. So you get one right out of the gate.
Okay. Both of them sound good. Since a character creation is only completed when exposed to the other players, that's actually an advantage that the RPG of Invisible Sun has over D&D. Because in D&D, when people make loners, they make loners bereft of any necessary connection to anybody, which can make for difficult buy-in by the players on the actual role-playing or in helping out other players with what they desire to do, because you didn't have any way to connect to anything.
Yeah.
Whereas even if I were to pick something like a bizarre, And it's like, I'm really on the outside. That's okay, because the other players will forge connections between me and other people and other places and other things that will still give me a grounding and give me a connection into the game.
Well, and we'll touch on that because we'll talk a little bit about what happens in the first session. We won't do it here, but we'll kind of talk through it. But one of the things is that every player ends up with a bond to another player. And I'll show you guys the one on the character sheet that I showed at the beginning for Erin, a couple of hers, because they're not necessarily positive bonds, but they're bonds that entwine you with the other players and with what's happening.
Okay.
So do we want to go with Bizarre for this purpose?
Let's go with Bizarre.
Okay. So you are a Bizarre.
Bizarre perceptive of the weaver who inhales the ether. Or order of weavers who inhales the ether.
All right. And you said you had a name for this?
Tamir. T-A-M-I-I-R.
Like that?
Yep.
Excellent. And then, yeah, we could plug in, at this point, we'd plug in the income, the initial savings, the hidden knowledge,
That's
the house.
That's minutia.
You know, I'm not going to do that, but basically you can see the gist of how I do this. And
Yep.
I plug in a bit of a structure like this, and then I start filling it out as I go. Or I'll put in, the nice thing with Notion, I'll put in little check boxes for things where it's like, oh, I need to go back and do that.
Right.
For a couple things that I'll touch on. So you'll start off with no spells or secrets unless character generation gives you one for some reason.
Okay.
But those are the things that you're likely going to acquire by spending experience as you go. Most of the rest of the stuff we will flesh out after that first session, or it doesn't need to be fleshed out until after. So for example, who you were in Shadow, meaning the world that we're in right now, doesn't have to be the same person. It could be someone completely different. And so having a sense of like, who were you? What were you doing? And you're able to have a shadow skill that you brought back with you. So that counts as a skill just like any other skill. And you brought a memento back. So that's all relevant stuff. And that's very, there's a lot of really fun ways to do things with that.
All right.
But that's something where, especially if you're just starting the game, there's a lot of other things going on, and you might have a better sense of who you were in Shadow after you know who the other players are. Similarly, the soul is a secret that only you and the game master know until you use it, at which point it's revealed to anyone that's around there. I have yet, like I've been playing for almost a year, I have yet to have any players reveal their soul. It's an interesting one-use ability, basically. It's a cool thing. It's not super important to have defined right away. Character arcs are going to be super important. Bonds are going to be super important, but those are going to be things that you can define either just before or just after that first session. So sorry, go ahead.
Just agreeing, not actually speaking. Sorry.
Yeah. So let me show you first. I'll show you Erin's character sheet here a little bit. You can see I have a little bit of a description. So she's modestly built, but tough as nails. Glassy white eyes are usually obscured with sunglasses, blah, blah, blah. I had some of my, this is just a bunch of random notes. I plugged in all the different things that could lead to joy and despair for her as just a quick reference. And this is some of the other stuff that I've plugged in. But here you can see under bonds, for example. So the bonds that I had with the other players, I had an unrequited bond with Gnosis, who really wanted to be friends, and I really didn't care for him whatsoever. And so, and every bond gives a benefit and a drawback. So in this case, Gnosis would gain a +1 to all actions when I was around. But I always move away. And then the other one was fellow students for Constantine. And in this case, we had both gone to the same fraternity at the Vancinian University. And so we each gained a spell of level 3 or less. It had to be the same spell for both of us. And so we chose the spell, the Grudge, but we can only use it within long range of each other.
Right.
So basically, we got to start with a spell. In this case, it's a magical barrier is what a grudge is for this.
Okay.
But you'll see that I noted that I got this from that fellow student bond as a little reminder for myself. So that's how I've done some of those things.
Okay.
Here in the key, they have a whole chapter on the first session. And the first session was where you'll sit down, you'll kind of go through and define neighbors for everybody, nearby points of interest. What are some of the local issues? People don't necessarily live in the same neighborhood, although it helps. But having a sense of, okay, you're roughly here, or maybe we go shopping at the same place, or we study at the same place. You have these ideas of how things start to overlap a little bit, and you're also building out the world. It helps really see the surreal, give people a sense of the weird and the surreal in the setting, because they're starting to get in the habit of making it themselves as well.
Yeah.
And then
real.
Yeah, so then you're building the PC bonds, coming up together with them. And so they have a whole section of them. Where is it? Here's the connections. Oh, here it is, down here. PC bonds. So yeah, so you have a whole bunch of them here that they define
earlier. And...
Yeah. So for example, like I have 2 players who have been housemates. So they started off, but it meant that one of them didn't have a house, which worked because she was itinerant anyway. But as of our last session, now they're both houseless. Well, they have since found housing, but yeah. So you'll build the PC bonds, and then they talk about I don't even know how to say that.
Desideratum.
Desideratum. There we go. Really, that's mostly about just getting on the same page as to what type of game are we all trying to have? Are we going to try to go kill the baddie? Are we going to have a mystery thing? Are we trying to gain power and money? What are we trying to do? And
I just want to get married. There's all these things.
Yeah. So, a lot of that, I didn't bother with that, but that was also because we'd already effectively had the conversations where we knew roughly what general direction we're going on and could refine from there. But that is character generation. Having gone through this process very, very briefly, very in passing, what are some of the takeaways that you have that surprised you, or just took you down a different route than you had gone before?
The interconnectedness of the choices. One of the first things I was noticing as we were going along doing this was the fact that with each decision I made, however arbitrary it might have been, the choice was sort of lingering in the back of my head and coloring every choice I made afterwards, because I was thinking of those choices through the lens of what I'd already picked. Mm-hmm. And so, interestingly, although there's a wealth of options to the tune of, if you tried to calculate them, they'd be so friggin' massive as to be absolutely intimidating in the extreme. They're not working out to be that intimidating to go through, as long as you don't overthink it, because they lend themselves to a certain feel. And as you pick things and as you imagine them, many options that come up later simply you can brush them aside because you know that's not where I'm going. That's not the right thing for what I've already picked. Like if I'd picked something like, if I picked a Maker, both breathes runes and inhales the ether probably would, neither of which would have actually been on my list of what I would wish to do. Just and that would have been lingering in the back of my head. Like I could have done something else as a weaver, but those are the ones that were speaking the most clearly to the previous choices I'd already made.
Yeah.
So this character generation process is less complicated than you might expect given the wealth of options, because they bleed into each other so much.
Yeah, I think the only real complaint that I have with it is that there's a lot of non-obvious minutia that, in particular, so for example, with the Forte, having little highlights about background and appearance and character arcs, and then having stuff like that again. And I know the first time that I went through that stuff, I kind of blew past it. I didn't treat it as being as fundamental. We didn't really talk about character arcs, and I'll touch on that in a moment. We didn't really treat that as significant because you're like, okay, well, what are the abilities? What is this mechanically getting me? But I mean, that stuff's just as fundamental, and it really helps with giving you a sense of, okay, if I'm a person who inhales the aether, what's my relationship to ghosts?
Right.
Like, you know, that just adds this whole different thing. If I'm like, I'm looking at this bizarre perceptive of the Order of Weavers who inhales the aether, and I'm thinking like you live in like some sort of balloon that has a vacuum inside. Like there's an atmosphere inside. It's just aether, and you're living in an aether balloon or something, you know, ludicrous like that. But the character arcs were the other thing that I didn't touch on, that I had people define, actually not even during the session 0, but I think after the session 1 or as part of the session 1. And the character arcs are, what are you, the character, trying to do? Because that's what actually drives your experience, is what are you trying to do? And the GM then weaves together a story that fits the character arcs for all of the players.
At some point.
At some point or other. It's going to be uneven. So what's going to be a meaningful progression for your character isn't necessarily going to be meaningful progression for another character. And so there's going to be a little bit of a herky-jerk roll and tumble for, you know, what does experience advancement look like? But go ahead.
What it also would do, though, is provide a mechanical means to aid in people's gaining of both joy and despair, sometimes simultaneously with two different people. Because by actively pursuing this one person's path of joy, you're also actively causing this other person's path to despair.
Yeah, and you can be, yeah.
Like it can happen. The point is, by actively pursuing only one or two of the player's goals, you can also end up with significant mechanical impacts on the arcs of the other characters by doing so. And so that
and the arcs can be completed without being completed successfully.
Yes.
Is another thing. Like maybe
closed and rendered impossible.
I mean, going back to the what was that bond? The unrequited bond. Like, you know, maybe there's an NPC or something like that you're really seeking to befriend, and it just at some point it becomes decisive. Like, look, I'm getting a restraining order. You need to leave me alone. And the GM says, okay, you know, you're closing that up, and here's a despair for you. That's very much the kind of thing. So all of that requires a little bit of a rewiring for certain players' brains, because you're not, what your character wants matters.
It's not the overall arc by definition.
Yeah. And strangely, like the thing that I've given that's been similar a little bit was actually Gloomhaven, where each character has their own sort of like longer arc, and then for this session, this is what I care about. And I mean, that's a much more of a dungeon crawler roguelike type board game, but it has that element, and stressing that helps a lot because it's like, okay, that's where we're focusing. But yeah, that's character creation. I'll close this off here, and we'll pick up next time on exploring the Soothe deck.
Okay. See you.